June 11th, 2012. It's now 10 minutes after 2. We're going to begin this meeting with general public comment. Then following general public comment, following the closure of general public comment, we'll be retiring into closed session to consider the items 1 through 8. And then we'll return here for a regular agenda. We'll be taking closed session in the back room, so if you're here on another item, you're welcome to stay in this room. So we'll begin now. And by the way, I'm Paul Krikorian, chair of the committee, and I'm joined by the Honorable Paul Koretz. And we will begin with public comment. The only card so far that I have for public comment is from Dr. Weissman, who I'd like to come forward. If anybody else would like to speak on general matters, please fill out a card and bring it forward. Dr. Weissman, welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the courtesy of putting public comment first. I wonder what the people in the back of me are here for. That's another issue. Two general comments. Mr. Parks and Ms. Perry, as you know, put in a motion on the watershed issue regarding outreach from neighborhood councils. Should that pass, and I'm very strongly in favor of it passing, it's going to require a great deal of interaction between the various council members and the various neighborhood councils, giving us information as to what the major issues are so that we can prepare and bring you material. The other issue I want you to consider this afternoon is Tran 12. I think this is your last chance. It's not the last chance I'm giving you. You'll have a few other chances after this. But this is your last chance to ask the DWP to come forth with the $250 million of their donation to the city, obligatory donation to the city, which usually doesn't come in for another 8-10 months. Should that come in early, that will save the city between $5 and $10 million. I know of no argument that has been able to withstand logic that would oppose this. I know you requested the city administrative officer to look into it and to come back with a response, and I'm sorry I don't know what the response was. But the biggest response that I've heard was that it would jeopardize the DWP's bond rating. Well, we know that it did jeopardize the city's bond rating. So whose ox is getting gored first? The real issue here, I think, is that there is an obligation on July 1st that is not being paid. Either they pay it with interest or they pay it promptly and on time, and I think you should put that into this year's budget and then take that money and put it back to the neighborhood councils where we can use it better.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Weissman. Have we received any other public comment cards? All right. Then that will close general public comment. We're now prepared, Mr. Kretz, Mr. Rosendahl, and I are prepared to go to the back room for closed session. So if you're here on another matter, you're welcome to stay. But we will now go into closed session. And have your attention. We're back in regular session now. When we were in closed session, we were also joined by Mr. Cardenas, and we're ready to proceed now in open session with item number 9, the year-end FSR.
All right. Item number 9 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to the year-end status report for fiscal year 2011-12. I'm sorry, I'm going to switch chairs.
Actually, before you begin, we do have one card. It's Dr. Weissman, but is Dr. Weissman still here? No? No Dr. Weissman? Okay, well then we will... That's the only card I have on that matter, so proceed.
So close the public comment.
We had already closed general public comment, yeah.
All right. Before you is the final year-end financial status report for 11-12. The report was prepared by staff, Melissa Krantz, who unfortunately is off today. To give you sort of the highlights, we had reported earlier through the second FSR sort of a total shortfall of $72 million, and we had proposed various solutions in order to mitigate that 72. Now that we are at year-end, it turns out that there's approximately $18 million in additional shortfalls that have come about. These are primarily due to revenue shortfalls. We had notified council earlier that possibly we'd be short in a couple revenue categories, one being BLF receipts. The state actually reduced our appropriation in the vehicle license fee revenue, and that was roughly about $4 million. We also were short in a few other categories that sort of brought down that total by roughly about $7 million. In addition, in working with the Bureau of Sanitation, it turns out some of the special fund reimbursements from both the solid waste resources and also the sewer construction, those reimbursements were going to be short by several $1 million as well. As we turn to the expenditure deficits with police and fire, those went up slightly, and so we end up with a total of $18.4 million. We do provide some solutions to mitigate those. We do have monies that were set aside in the UB. We were also transferring some additional monies to the UB. We have identified some capital finance savings of 6.9. We had some other savings, small savings. Also took care of a portion of the deficit. And then lastly, we do have reserve fund loans to police and fire, approximately $5.5 million. So with that, with those actions, those recommendations, we would close the year dealing with all of the shortfalls as we currently close out the year. Now, if you like, we can go through the individual departments, discuss anything in detail. I would like to note that we do have some additional changes to attachment number 3. Since one of the big ones was there was a transfer of $400,000 for GST that was taken care of through another matter. We also had a request from the mayor's office to transfer $94,500 from one of their revenue accounts to actually their salaries as needed account. And I believe there actually will be a few other transfers, other recommendations as well.
Okay.
So with those, I'll be happy to go into any additional detail.
So, we should have done this before we went into closed session, and I frankly just forgot. What we should do, I think, members, is go through and call out whichever departmental areas you would like to ask questions about. And let's go through the list real quick. And then if there's no questions about particular areas, then staff can go back. Doesn't need to stick around. So
with that, are there any questions, concerns regarding the summary? That takes us through page 7 of the report. I do note that we do highlight a few concerns as we move forward into 12-13, some of the one-time expenditures and revenue, but that will we'll be working with this committee as we go forward next fiscal year to address those concerns.
Okay.
Are there any questions with the actual recommendations starting at the bottom of page 7, going all the way through page 18?
So I think what we're going to do here, colleagues, is let's just go through. Let's quickly go through the list of departments, and if there's no discussion about particular departments, then that departmental staff can go back. So anything on?
So page 19 is aging. I'm hearing none. Page 20, we have starting at the top with animal services and building and safety. Page 21, we have the CAO and city attorney. 22 is the city clerk. 23, CDD.
No, well, we're just going to go through and see if there's any questions, and then if there aren't, don't break a leg, Ms. Lagman.
There is a small technical adjustment to one of the accounts for the city clerk, which we can actually address through the technical corrections. I know city clerk had a question.
Okay, so then we'll come back to city clerk then. CDD?
CDD was 23. It takes us to page 24. On the top of page 25, we have the controller and council.
And convention center.
And yes, the convention center, thank you. If no questions, going to page 26, we have cultural affairs, disability, El Pueblo, emergency management, and employee relations board. 27 is the ethics and the office of finance. Page 28 is fire. 29 is general services and housing. At the bottom of page 30, we have ITA. And moving to page 31, we have the library and the mayor. 32, we have neighborhood empowerment, personnel, and planning.
I
think
have a
there's
neighborhood empowerment issue.
Neighborhood empowerment, yes. On the top of page 33, we have police. 34, we have the board and Con Ed. 35, we have,
When's
We're going to do neighborhood empowerment.
Yes.
We're going to talk about
Yes.
that.
and then, I'm sorry, on page 35, we have engineering. Okay. 36, we have the Bureau of Sanitation. And then rolling over to page 37, we have street lighting.
Okay, so I want to add, I do have a question on finance, so we'll go back to finance.
Okay.
Any other departments? that
Just so
call-
you know,
like
the only
call
question I
special?
have is to the CAO. I don't have a specific question to the departments.
Okay. Page 38, we have street services, and the departments go through page 40 with the zoo. So we have street services, rec and parks. I think there was a question on rec and parks as well.
I have one on rec and
Yeah,
parks as
rec and
well.
Parks. We have DOT on the top of 41. And then, like I said, we end up on page 43 with the zoo. Okay. On the bottom of page 43, we then talk about the non-departmental accounts. That includes the CAP Finance, GCP, and Human Resource Benefits on page 44.
Transportation here, I want to put them on for a couple of just simple questions.
Okay.
Page 45, we have the liability claims, the recovery zone, and the reserve fund and budget stabilization. Flipping over to page 46, we have special parking revenue fund. And I think I would like to just note that the ordinance with the recently approved ordinance signed off, there is a possibility that we don't receive those funds in the current fiscal year. We did include a recommendation that if those funds happen to be reverted next fiscal year, that they just stay in the reserve fund, so we basically replace those funds. On page 47, we have the UB.
Mr. Kress?
I have a question on the bottom of 47 on voluntary furloughs.
Okay, furloughs down there, okay. And then page 48 through 49, it gives some information on performance budgeting efforts, the status of fee increases, the Mccray commercial paper program, fee waivers and subsidies, and then the grid. I'm starting at the bottom of page 49. On page 50, we give a brief statement or some information on state budget. Okay. Any questions, any of those other non-departmentals at all?
Nope. All right. I hope you
Actually, I have
could-
one other
Mr.
question.
Fritz.
I'll just want to ask a little bit about the state budget also, just on whether there's anything new in terms of impacts on the city.
Okay.
All right, now assuming you took better notes than I did, why don't we go ahead and read back the list of question areas so that we can release anybody who's not on that list.
Sure. So we'll have the city clerk. We'll start first. We'll go to Office of Finance. There was a question for neighborhood empowerment. We had then DOT, Rec and Parks, and then a couple questions on the non-departmental, one on the furloughs and one on the state budget. Okay, so we can go back to city clerk.
Right, so if anybody is here on matters that we didn't just mention, thank you very much for being here. Sorry to keep you this long. You're free to go. Give everybody a minute, Mr. Sir.
Chair Lagnay, Office of the City Clerk, honorable members of the committee, we're here just to ask for 3 technical ministerial changes in the year-end FSR. First, I think, is one that the CAO is cognizant of. There was a wrong account number penned into attachment 4, and we've provided the correct fund number that the 432,000 some dollars should be transferred to, so that was just a typo. Our second request is the FSR acknowledges some expenditure, 2 small expenditures that the clerk made, but we would feel more comfortable if it was moved up to the recommendation portion, so it's on the record that these expenditures were made. And the third one is a reversion of a small amount, $12,500, from GCP Council District 12 to pay invoices on an existing contract with Friends of Oak Ridge.
Reappropriation. It's a reappropriation.
Reappropriation. So these are just technical changes that were just not caught in the original FSR.
Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments about this? Okay.
Thank you.
And so we'll work with the clerk. The request on regarding the 41,000 to 70,000, there would like to have those actually sort of stand out as formal recommendations, given those 2 items, as I understand it
Yes,
correctly.
approval of the expenditure, correct.
Okay.
More formalized.
Correct, more formal.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that will take us to the Office of Finance.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Saul Romo for the Office of Finance.
Maria Gutierrez with the CAO's office.
Hi. So the question I had on this is about bank fees. It seems like the bank fee overage is a regular part of these FSRs, and I know that Finance has tried to take steps to reduce the bank fee overages, and I just wanted to find out what the progress of those steps is in trying to bring those costs down. And then also we have, for 2012-13, we've appropriated $8.1 million, $6 million in finance and $2.1 in the UB. And as we sit here today, does it continue to be Finance's belief that that will be enough to cover bank fees for the fiscal year?
Good afternoon. We are victims of our own success with respect to bank fees. The large portion of the overages that we're seeing are from merchant card fees. As the departments throughout the city move toward credit card usage as options for the citizens to make payments, there is a fee that is associated for us as the client, the City of Los Angeles. So with every transaction, whether it's somebody issuing a credit card into a parking meter, whether it's somebody making a payment online, as we see the increased uses in credit cards, we see corresponding increases in bank fees associated with merchant card fees. The good thing is that the department has been aggressively recovering some of the merchant card fees from proprietary departments and special funded departments, so we're able to offset those bank fees. We have increased, as well as having an increase in the bank fee usage, we also have been seeing corresponding increases in the revenue coming in from reimbursements. So that's a positive note. The department is also taking proactive steps now to evaluate the banking fee services that are provided to assess are we being overcharged relative to other corporations or rather to other entities. We're going to be looking to a private contractor to assess our banking fee structure and make some recommendations on areas where we can get some cost reductions and where we think it's appropriate for us to renegotiate some of those services with our banking corporations.
I'm sorry, if the private contractor that you're looking at is a consultant to make recommendations or a contractor to actually do the processing and collection?
Well, to make recommendations.
Okay.
To make recommendations. With respect to the fees, the allotment for fees for next year, the next fiscal year, we believe that we can still remain on target to cover our bank fees with the 6.1 million that's allocated, and we certainly know that we have the 2.1 in the UB. We do monitor that very closely. Our CAO is very diligent in responding to us on our monthly FSRs and making all of the necessary inquiries to ensure that we are on track with our banking fees. We do want to alert the council so that you're not alarmed if we do start responding back to the council in our financial status reports with an elevated merchant fee cost. As departments continue to be successful in implementing online credit card payments, for instance, we understand that the Bureau of Public Works may implement a web-based payment structure. We're going to continue to see this elevated activity and the corresponding level of increases in bank fees. Again, that's simply because we've become victims of our own success, because it's a much more efficient process. Although there's a cost associated, it's a much more efficient process, because in the long run you don't have to worry as much over cash handling procedures. You get the money instantaneously through a credit card transaction. The only delays that we experience in the Office of Finance on the costs is the reimbursements from the proprietary and special funded departments. And I could say that the departments that we've been working with at this point, the Department of Airports, Harbor, DWP, and DOT, have been very good at making regular payments and timely payments, so we've been seeing the revenue come in on a regular basis. At this point, the FSR does make a recommendation for a reserve fund loan. We now have within our revenue source about 80 to 90% of that money that we can immediately repay to the reserve fund. So we've been very good and very proactive at obtaining those monies.
Can you remind me, what are the restrictions on our ability to charge a convenience fee to people who are making online payments with credit cards to sort of offset some of those bank fees?
I don't have that answer for you, Councilmember. I can report back to you if you'd like on what the restrictions are.
I know that the county and other governmental entities actually use a private contractor to do their credit card payment processing, and the convenience fee is added onto that. And sometimes I think the convenience fee is probably more than what they're charging in fees, but do you know this offhand?
This is Jan Zatorsky, Assistant Director of Finance. The City of Los Angeles uses a contractor for third-party processing for all of our credit card payments. We actually have two processors. One is called Elevon, and the other is Wells Fargo's Merchant Services. So again, how the contracts were split before. Recreation and Parks, Library, and DWP use Wells Fargo Merchant Services, and the rest of the city uses Elevon. Frankly, what we're doing right now is looking into a request for proposal for companies that can do cost recovery review and analysis of our credit card charges and interchange rates to make sure that we're paying the correct rates in accordance with our contract. So we may be going out to bid for that shortly.
Well,
to find ways to save.
My point is a little different than that. It's can we impose upon the consumer a convenience fee for the ability to make that online payment by credit card? I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily the best policy direction. It may not be, because it may discourage use, which reduces the efficiency gains that we have from this and the collections gains. But I think it's something that we ought to at least look at it as a policy option. I mean, there's many vendors who have an add-on to the cost if you use a credit card. So I wonder if we might not be able to do the same thing.
I think what you're asking then is if we, for instance, on the costs associated with our credit card usage, for example, can we pass that cost on to the consumer, meaning the, those individuals that are, citizens who are using the service, if I'm reading you correctly?
Yeah, if you want to pay for something online, you pay price plus 2% or price plus $10 or whatever.
I think as we go to bid and as we identify, our consultant services to identify areas for potential savings and areas where we can reduce costs, I think that's certainly one area where we can investigate.
There are some restrictions. The Department of Transportation does have a convenience fee. Yes, they have a $2 convenience fee when you pay online. Right now, we're working with Department of Sanitation to put their industrial waste billings online. And as we're looking at that, we are recommending that they add a convenience fee to that. So our process is we really have to go through each one and make sure that we can apply it. Where we can apply it, we will make recommendations to apply that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything further for finance colleagues? Mr. Cardenas.
When it comes to, I think, paying our service providers or vendors or contractors within 30 days or something like that, don't we take some off the top of their bill or something like that? We have that in the city, right?
For discounts, I believe you're talking, when the controller's office, who does all of our payables is through the controller's office. There's certain vendors will offer discounts, correct, if you pay within a certain time frame.
And who imposes that discount when we see that we can capture that discount? Is it Department of Finance determines that, or the various departments that are actually contracting with the vendor?
Yeah, my understanding, it's through the various contracts that the departments have, or through the controller's FMS.
But at the time of payment, that's when the contractor realizes, when they get a check, oh yeah, they deducted X percentage because it was they did it within 30 days or something like that.
I'm not quite sure.
I'm asking the wrong. Okay, then the question of the CAO. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So there is basically a general a policy to basically pay within 30 days, take care of the discount. It is monitored through the controller's office, and I know actually this is one of the priorities that the mayor, going back several years, directive to departments to make sure they process and make sure those payments are made within the 30 days or whatever the discount period is. I believe there's actually, the controller did an audit, I want to say maybe a year or two ago, that actually talked about some of the discounts and perhaps alluded to the fact that maybe departments in some cases were paying a little bit too soon, not trying to pay outside of the discount window, but perhaps they're waiting till we get to the 20 or 25 day within the 30-day period. I know the controller did an audit probably about a year ago on that.
Yeah, but what I was told by a vendor that there's a little bit of abuse in the way we view our advantage. For example, say somebody provides the service in January, and then naturally they turn in their paperwork, they want to get paid, then, oh, you're missing a document or what have you. They go back and forth. 6 months later, they finally get payment, and then all of a sudden we deduct the amount. even though they provided the service 6 months earlier. So we conveniently are saying, oh, it was from the date that you actually gave us that final little document, you cross that T or dotted that I, it's within 30 days of that moment. And they're sitting there going, that's not cool. I had to wait 7 months. I'm hanging out there 7 months without getting paid. And now you're conveniently saying you paid me within 30 days because we were going back and forth for 6 months, but the actual work got done 7 months earlier. Which might be funny if you're AT&T or something like that. You got gazillions of dollars, you're all over the country, this and that. But if you're a small vendor, first of all, waiting 6 months to get paid is horrendous for small vendors. I was a small businessman at one time. And then to see that all of a sudden you've waited all that time, you paid interest on that money if you had to balance your books by borrowing money until you got paid. Then all of a sudden the city conveniently says, oh no, it's 30 days from the last time we communicated with each other, not from when the work got done. So I'll just do a motion on it. Good. Never mind.
I'll second it when you do it.
Thank you. That's abuse.
Okay, anything further for finance? All right, thank you very much.
This should take us to neighborhood empowerment,
Neighborhood empowerment.
and I believe there's a recommendation to transfer some funds.
Yes, and I saw Mr. Kim a minute ago. Mr. Kim, oh yes, there he is.
A question of CAO.
Yeah, go right ahead, boy.
A question of CAO on the, I noticed on the recreation and parks when it comes to reduced revenues and golf program, 1.2 million. What exactly is that from?
We're actually going to do Rec and Parks. Separate.
I just wanted to ask the CAO where that's from.
You know, I'll have to ask the analyst on that.
Okay, never mind.
Let me get the
We'll
analyst.
wait till we get there.
No,
No, when we get
we'll
there.
do done, and we're going to get back to Rec and Parks.
All right.
All right, Mr. Kim, welcome.
Good afternoon.
There was a departmental recommendation about a $120,000 transfer. I wanted you to just discuss that for a moment, please.
Thank you. In our last FSR, we had a salary savings of roughly $122,000. It was our request for the council to consider transferring those funds to contractual services so that we could use that to pay for a e-platform for the Neighborhood Council Funding Program. Mr. Chair, as the former chair of the Education Neighborhoods Committee, you understand fully the problems with the Neighborhood Council Funding Program, the fact that it is entirely manual, the fact that it wasn't designed to meet kind of two almost opposing needs in terms of end users being city departments as opposed to Neighborhood Council volunteers. So 4 months ago, I secured a consultant to do a system design analysis for the Neighborhood Council Funding Program with the notion of creating an electronic platform. Basically, the goals are to create a system that is web-based, that neighborhood councils can use to submit their budgets, to submit their check requests, for all of the data to be loaded up onto their budget template, which would also contain their financial information in terms of how much was allocated, how much was spent, how much has remained to be spent. And this tool would add immeasurably to the city's ability to be responsive in terms of making sure that the payments are done on time, making sure that neighborhood councils know where the payment requests are in the pipeline, and reduce significantly the amount of staff time that's currently required to staff this project. So it would be my recommendation and request that we be able to use these funds for that purpose.
Colleagues, this e-platform is central to our ability to reform the Neighborhood Council Funding Program and provide transparency and accountability and usefulness for the neighborhood councils, for that matter. So it's a really important next step that the council actually already approved in concept, actually, by moving forward with the funding program reform measure that I introduced when I was chair of ENN. So I think that since there has been savings in the salaries fund, and this is an appropriate use of that funding, I would recommend transferring $120,000 from the salaries fund to contractual services fund for Dunn to be able to move forward with this
In a
project.
second, I'll second that enthusiastically.
Thank you. Any other discussion about that or concerns? Then, thank you, Mr. Kim. That will be the recommendation to amend the FSR to include that instruction. Mr. Rosendahl.
Yeah, transparency is key, obviously, and the more we're transparent, the happier I am as a government. Now, how many neighborhood councils are there? 89 or
95.
95? And rollover monies, whatever happened to whatever?
The city council took action 2 fiscal years ago to eliminate the rollover policy. So what I've done in response to that is institute an encumbrance procedure, which basically is composed of neighborhood councils submitting demand warrants by a certain deadline. This year it was May 15th. As long as they submit demand warrants by that time, whatever we can't pay this fiscal year will encumber for next fiscal year. Secondly, in working with the controller, because the city council took action to transfer elections over to back to the department from the city clerk, what I also instituted was allowing neighborhood councils to encumber funds specifically for elections outreach. So roughly 44 neighborhood councils submitted requests to encumber about $270,000 just for elections outreach.
So there'll be 44 neighborhood council elections, or do you think there's more, but 44 submitted?
We'll be conducting elections for roughly about 80 neighborhood councils, and all of them are expected to do some kind of outreach for the upcoming
And
election.
have you notified them yet about it, and any time frame? What is the time frame, in November, December?
The first one will be in November. That'll be in the Valley. And the last ones will be held roughly in November. Or, I'm sorry, the first ones will be held in August, and then the last ones will be held in November.
So the ones I'm talking about, my 4, 5, or 6 will be in November.
No, I believe the west side will be, I don't have my schedule with me, but we're working with them probably around
You
October.
share that schedule offline
Of course.
at the point for all of my, because they talk to me about it all the time. I'm very happy that we're moving forward with it this year, but I need that data. Thank you, Mr.
And we are doing it for half the cost that the city spent 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl. And to that point, not to belabor it here because this is Budget and Finance, not E&N, but one of the principal motivations, I think, for moving elections from the clerk back to Dunn was to realize those cost savings, in part because when we were spending the over $2 million through the clerk, there wasn't sufficient resources left to do adequate outreach, and that was a widely repeated concern throughout the neighborhood councils throughout the city. So given the fact that we are now reducing those costs, that Dunn has taken responsibility, outreach remains a critically important element in my view. And I know that, Mr. Kim, you're endeavoring through the department to try to do whatever you can with limited resources to do outreach. The neighborhood councils individually are. I would urge you to lean on the council offices as well, and to try to make sure that all of the council offices are fully informed about the election cycle and about how we can be used, how our various communications vehicles can be used to further the cause of outreach as well.
We'll follow up on that immediately.
I'm going to be doing that, obviously, with you, because, Venice has 1,100 people voted last time. Our Vista's 400 to 500, so is Westchester. Del Rey's somewhere between 400 and 500. A couple of them aren't, but they're very, very significant. The amount of money we're giving them next year is what?
37,000 is the...
And with this outreach and with this election, will they get credit for what they do in terms of that? How will their monies work in their mind, or our mind for their?
The annual allocation next year isn't really related to the elections, so they're kind of separate issues at this point.
Okay.
Anything further for Dunn, members? All right. Thank you, Mr. Kim.
Okay, that would then take us to Rec and Parks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, Mr. Cardenas?
Yeah, thank you. I noticed that it talks about a reduced revenues in the golf program of 1.2 million. Where did that come from? How did we arrive at that number?
Virginia Adams, Executive Officer of Recreation and Parks. For our golf division, which you know for the last 2 fiscal years has been totally taken offline to be self-sufficient, but it's the projected budget is based upon them being fully staffed. And so based upon that, there's a dollar amount that was in the budget for them to be able to reimburse the city general fund for benefits and so forth, but they're not fully staffed. And that's why you're seeing they're off by $1.2 million.
But I just want to clarify, they're off by $2 million.
As far as what they would have had to reimburse the city general fund if they were fully staffed.
Okay, so the fact that they're not fully staffed, it costs more money?
No, what I'm saying is that's $1.2 million less that the city general fund would receive because all the people aren't there to be reimbursed if all the positions have been filled.
Oh, okay. So when they are fully staffed, they are going to be dependent.
And that would have been
on the
another
general fund?
$1.2 million they would have had to reimburse the city general fund.
So when they are fully staffed, they will be on or off the general fund
They were always, at this point, they are off the general fund.
currently?
100%.
And when they're fully staffed, we anticipate they'll still be
Exactly.
not on the general fund?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, colleagues, I wanted to call this special just to discuss one relatively small point in the big scheme of things. The council, some members of the council, myself included, have begun discussing how we can spread the cost of liability more broadly so that when departments fail to act in ways and that ends up resulting in liability, that there be some mechanism of accountability. And I hate for this discussion to involve Rec and Parks, because let me just say first that I think what Rec and Parks has done with their resources that they have in my district, and I'm sure in all of our districts, is kind of superhuman. And the fact that they can keep the lights on and services provided and the maintenance that they do with the limited resources is tremendous. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is there was a case called Mccray versus City of Los Angeles, in which a man was playing tennis on a tennis court, stumbled on a hole in the court, took a header, separated a shoulder, was seriously injured, ended up costing the city $100,000. And so when that matter came before the claims board, it was my recommendation, when I learned that this was a known defect for a matter of years, that there had been complaints about it to the park, but also even to the council office for the district. It was a well-known defect, and and again, I'm very sensitive to the demands that the park staff is under, both in terms of time, but also the demands of the public to keep these facilities open. But there was no closure, there was no repair, and we found out that the repairs would have cost a matter of a few $100s, and would have taken a very short amount of time to do, because these repairs are all done by outside contractors. So it was my recommendation at the time of claims board that the $100,000 in liability be paid in settlement of the case, but it be paid out of Recreation and Parks funds. That claims board approved that recommendation, and then when we were debating the budget, it was reconsidered in the claims board when the Budget and Finance Chair was engaged in budget discussions in this committee. So I wasn't present at that time, and the claims board reversed the recommendation and recommended that the $100,000 in payment of that settlement be paid from the general fund, as is the case with most settlements. So the recommendation that I had originally made was reversed by the claims board at the meeting that I was not in attendance. So I wanted to bring that to the committee for discussion, I recognize that there has not been a broad citywide discussion of this issue and a change in policy broadly, but that was my recommendation that was approved by the Claims Board, and I would move again that in this FSR, that $100,000 payment be, that the CAO coordinate with Rec and Parks to ensure that that payment for that settlement come out of the surplus that the Rec and Parks Fund has this year. So that's my thought. Mr. Cardenas.
Could you help me? Could you help clarify for me, Mr. Chairman? So it was a well-known defect in that particular case. Eventually, somebody fell. It resulted in a lawsuit. We settled for $100,000, and your preferred action would have been to have Rec and Parks pay it out of their fund, the $100,000 settlement.
Right.
Now, that's because Rec and Parks was provided with all the resources necessary, but just didn't get around to fixing it, or what was the logic?
Rec and Parks doesn't have the resources, period. That's for sure. Neither does any other department in this city. But at the time that a defect is known to a department and there is no action over the course of many years, not a month, not 6 months, but many years after multiple complaints and the engagement of the council office, it seems to me that there comes a point when this goes beyond an issue of everyday litigation that all our departments have to deal with, and it comes to a point where the department has to be held accountable for failing to respond to that. In this case, as I say, the repairs would have cost a few $1,000s at the most. This year, Recreation and Parks anticipates a year-end surplus of $4.3 million and a net revenue surplus of $2.3 million. Do they have enough to provide the services that we want them to provide? No, absolutely not. But at the same time, we can't, in my view, we can't allow any department to say that they're not going to perform services to keep the public safe because of lack of resources and end up costing the city more in, vastly more in liability exposure because of that.
I don't have a problem with sending that message. I just hope that the police department and the fire department are listening, because if anybody causes liability on the city, and there are in fact actions and or realities of looking in the mirror and what they can do to fix a lot of those liabilities to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a year, between every year, year after year, between those two departments. I don't mind sending a $100,000 message to Recreation and Parks, certainly with a revenue surplus as noted here, which we do appreciate. Yet at the same time, I can understand in running a department with, about 400 sites or so. I mean, it's like death by a million cuts. I mean, it might have been a $500 repair or a few $100 repair, but if you have a million repairs, that's $500 million. If you have a million little repairs that you wish you had the resources to get around to, that's $500 million just to get around to all the million little repairs. So I don't mind sending a message, Mr. Chairman. As policymakers, I think it's always important that we use whatever tools or methods that we have to try to get things in order around here. So I don't have a problem with a $100,000 message, yet at the same time, I hope that, again, all of our departments take heed, and especially our police and fire department.
No, I agree, and this is not intended, from my perspective, not intended in any way to be an indictment of Rec and Parks, not in any way.
They just happen to be the ones that we can make the first example of.
Committee members, may I comment, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Again, okay, respectfully, I have many comments on this item.
Great.
First is that when this item went before the Claims Board, two of the three members did not agree that Recreation and Parks should be tasked with paying $100,000. And we wrote a letter to the Claims Board, and actually we were waiting for this item to come before this body and then to the full council so that we could also make that known. What we discovered was that since this claim was for $100,000, as it goes, claims that are $100,000 or less are only handled at the claims board, and so it did not make it to this body or the full council. And so we wrote a letter to the claims board asking that this item be reconsidered. We also had the city attorneys who very much disagreed with us having to pay this claim. They also made the statement that for Recreation and Parks, when one of the most responsive departments, when an item is brought to our attention, that we try our best to try to handle. So that was why it was brought back, per our written request, it was brought back before the claims board. And Councilmember Krikorian was not at that second meeting because there were the Budget and Finance Committee hearings going on at that time. And so the request was, the city attorney requested that it be paid out of the claims account that is in the city attorney's office, and that's how it went down. And also our general manager has requested, has met once with Councilmember Krikorian, and I believe this week is scheduled to meet again regarding this item. Our concern is that for our Recreation and Parks, we have been treated very differently than other city departments in that, besides Recreation and Parks and Library, we have been disproportionately hit with costs that no other city department has been hit with. We at this time have to pay over $40 million out of our $180 million toward indirects. No other city department has been placed in that situation. Along with that, we have tried continually to continue to provide the services. And I would say that most of the city patrons who come to our facilities, you have not heard their complaints, because we have done as much as we can to try to keep the department going with the limited resources we have. We also have been trying to work with those limited resources. For example, we have many issues out there which we do not want to air publicly what those items may be, nor do we think the city should be doing that. You open yourselves up to many lawsuits. We have brought that to the attention. For example, as a council member Cardenas has just mentioned, we know that there are issues that happen in other city departments, and they have not been asked to pay the claims for those things, whether it was their fault or not. So we definitely disagree with having to pay this claim or any other claim. The other thing is that we have tried very much to be resourceful, prudent with the resources that we have to try to meet all your requests, as well as for the city patrons and others that come to all our facilities. We have over 400 facilities out there. We do not have the resources to do all of the needed repairs that are there. We have tried very diligently to do what we can, and as I stated, when something is brought to our attention, we try very hard to handle those situations. We just today had to turn down the police department. They wanted us to come and trim some trees at one of their facilities, and we had to tell them no, because we only have 15 people that are available to cover the trees that we have, and we have an inventory of over 1 million trees just for Recreation and Parks. And so we try to go out and provide the services for the other city departments for landscaping and tree trimming and so forth. However, we have told them that we will only come out if it is a health or safety situation. Otherwise, we are not able to handle it. Now, for our own resources, right now we have the summer. The pools are about to open. Our pools are very old. Every year we have to do a lot of patchwork to keep those pools open so that we can have as many as possible available for the patrons to be able to use and enjoy. But that is a task for us every year to try to be able to make that happen. In addition, as we're looking at things here, I know what the CAO report states about our projected revenue, but also, and I don't think there's any other department, if I'm wrong, I ask the CAO to correct me, but for the July 1st budget that's about to begin, Recreation and Parks, we have to self-fund over $3.8 million of our own budget. That means that we do have to work to try to have a surplus at the end of the fiscal years so that we can do that. Actually, it was supposed to have been $3.3 million, but there was an item that was double counted in the budget, which added another $500,000, $534,117 to be exact, that we now have to also cover. It is very challenging for us to be able to do this. We try very diligently with the people that we have, the resources we have. We contract when we're able. We also have a situation whereby we have our employees, because of the city's early retirement program, we have many people now who have complained per their MOUs that they may be working out of class or they should be receiving bonuses and so forth. We have been working very diligently with the various unions to try to address those issues, which also cost us more funds to be able to do. We disagree wholeheartedly that Recreation and Parks should be the department at this point in time that should be used as the one to pay any liability claim. I respectfully, Councilmember Krikorian, understand where you're coming from, but we have tried everything we can to provide the services to the city residents. And once again, I ask the CAO, please show us any other department that has been put in this situation. The library department, of course, just recently got a ballot measure passed whereby they all are receiving an additional amount from the property taxes, but that takes away from the property taxes that's available for the other departments. But along with that, they also got a large increase in their indirects. So it wouldn't have benefited our department to go over onto that ballot measure because we would not have received any additional funds to be able to provide the services and programs that we try to provide to the city residents. I don't mean to be rude. I understand what you're facing, but I also want to make sure you understand what we are facing. It's very challenging. Our employees work very hard, and they take a lot of pride in trying to provide those programs and services to the city residents. We try very hard to fill your requests when you ask us to do things as well. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I want to make sure everybody understands that. Also, our golf employees, we have about 400 full and part-time employees in our golf division who are now 100% responsible for bringing in revenue to cover all of their costs, where the city is no longer funding them for their pension contributions, their health care contributions, as well as their salaries. I'm sorry, but I don't know of many other employees in the city that have been placed in this situation. Again, it is challenging. We do everything we can to meet the request. These things have happened to us within a very short period of time, where we went from having to pay $0 in city indirects. Within about 4 years, now we have to pay over about $44 million. So respectfully, I understand where you're coming from, Councilmember Krikorian, but we totally disagree.
Okay. So first of all, you're not being rude or disrespectful in any way. I agree with every single word you've said. The department is under tremendous strain, and I think the department has done remarkable work despite all of that. I think that's not exactly the point. The point is that long before even those indirects were imposed and all that, people were complaining about this defect in this particular tennis court that could have been fixed for a small amount. Mr. Cardenas is certainly right. There's a death with 1,000 cuts aspect when you have lots and lots of little things that need repair. But the truth is, because this didn't find its way high enough on the priority list to fix, the city now has $100,000 less to support recreation and parks and all of its important services. So my point is that this city needs to start thinking in a different way about the expenditure of money. We are so siloed by departments that we lose sight of the larger picture and how the larger picture impacts on our ability to deliver services to our constituents. All of the things you said about the impacts that Rec and Parks has had are 100% right. The problem is that when decisions are made by your department or any other department, but there isn't a consequence that is related to that decision, then it throws off our ability to actually make the kind of risk assessment and prioritization that we should be doing. This is not a personal thing. I think this is true broadly across the city, and Mr. Cardenas mentioned other examples, and he's right about that as well. I think that ordinary liability and ordinary negligence cases, that is an obligation of the city and its general fund. But when it comes to situations where things are being ignored that have the risk of significant liability to the city, that can be dealt with at significantly reduced lower cost than that, managers need to take the responsibility to ensure that that gets done. And whether or not we choose to do this today, I want us to be starting on the path of changing that way of the way that this city has budgeted for liability, changing the way this city has assessed risk management, and realizing that it's all of our responsibilities to reduce risks, to reduce liability, because, you know, every day in closed session, every time we meet in closed session or in claims board, we're approving hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars in liability or outside counsel costs and so on, that much of which could be avoided for pennies on the dollars if we started thinking about it from the front end instead of the back end. And that's the important, you know, point that I think, you know, I want to make, regardless of what we end up doing on this particular case. I think we need to start changing that way of thinking. Now, when
There was also one other case that was presented, and the city attorney commented on, is that there was another situation whereby we had basketball courts that were damaged. And we tried to stop the public from using those, and we removed the nets and so forth. And the patrons went, first of all, they complained like crazy, and they went and put up nets themselves to continue to use the courts. And of course, someone got injured. Now, again, there are many situations out there which we're going through right now, trying to do an inventory of what those things are. And when we get that inventory, we will then be closing down what where those situations exist, which means that the council officers will be receiving phone calls from those various patrons. But that is what the position we'll be placed in. We are very well aware of the situations we have out there. And of course, now we got to take the time away from the limited resources we have to try to do this analysis because of this situation. But we do not want to be placed in a situation where this is now a new cost that will be added on our backs. Again, any dollar that we have to pay on these liability claims will take away from additional services and programs that we provide and make available to the city residents.
Mr. Rosendahl?
Yeah, Mr. Corian and Ms. Cardenas. I don't want to act on it today. I think your points are well taken. I know that I'm working with your department right now on some public-private partnerships for some of the projects that are key, but I know that you've been cut back every year to the point now where even the DWP fees you have to pay for, which puts you even in a more challenging position. So, Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I would, if you put the motion for, I'm going to vote no on it, but I would hope that this discussion clearly points out where we're at, and I know that you get hit pretty hard, because I know how my people feel. The plus side, even when you mentioned the golf thing, people got together in Westchester, they found lights in different spots, they did this, they did that, and it was an amazing relationship between your department, the community people in Westchester, and other people who got engaged and even came up with lights and for nightlight basketball. And I was there, and I know we're creatively trying to think out of the box, and I don't at this point feel like Record Park's suffering enough. And of course, if we put a line item for you, you'd get it automatically, but I don't like ballot budgeting. That's what we're elected for. That's why I didn't even like the library thing. Everybody voted for it. Obviously, the libraries are important, but that's, a priority. This is a priority, too. Everything is a priority. And I also appreciated when you said that the pension and health care benefits and the packages. Now, it's a difficult moment. I think, Mr. Chair, your point is well taken. Obviously, somebody has to be responsible for something around here within that context, and I think the message is clear. But my preference right now is this discussion is healthy, and I'd just like to leave it at that.
Well, I'm going to suggest this, because the issue really is not how hard a particular department has been hit or hasn't been hit, because most of our departments have been hit more than any of us would want them to be in terms of funding and support. At the same time, I recognize that this is a change in direction, and I do appreciate that Rec and Parks, I think, partly in response to this issue, has undertaken a comprehensive review of the facilities and assessment of the facilities, and I appreciate that, and I recognize that that may result in closure of facilities and a further reduction in services that we want to provide to our constituents. I recognize that, and that's a really unfortunate thing to have happen, but in my view, it's not as unfortunate as having the city face 6 or 7 digit liability, which detracts from our general fund and our ability to support services in the parks and in everything else. But I recognize that this is a matter of first impression, and I also recognize that I know some members of the council have discussed a broader policy that would address these sorts of situations. I think I'm willing to defer this matter to include it within that broader discussion. But I do just want to make as crystal clear as I can that that's a discussion that's going to be had in great detail, and it's just not going to be okay to have the city be the blank checkbook to pay for people's injuries, regardless of how strained the department is, because every department is strained and every department has budget challenges, but we can't put our people at risk. We can't, and I know that's not anybody's intention, but it's just the natural function of providing any services, any enterprise as large as the City of Los Angeles. There's going to be liability claims. There's going to be a lot of liability claims, and but we just have to realize that there's a cost to that, and that cost is reduced services because we're paying out these liability judgments and settlements. Mr. Kretz.
2 things. One, I think I agree with you. I think this needs to be a broader policy that's vetted by the whole council, and once we establish it, it applies to everybody. But I think we really need to talk through how we're going to do that. The other thing that you mentioned that I'm nervous about and not particularly happy about is the idea that we're going to close down a bunch of facilities rather than spend a relatively modest amount to fix them. I'm not sure at the end of the day that in terms of the whole cost of the city family, that if you cut down a bunch of recreational facilities and eliminate them, that you're not winding up creating other problems and other expenses in other places. Certainly, part of the value of funding libraries adequately is that kids have a place to go. They're encouraged to study. They're also off the street. They're not doing bad things. I mean, that's part of the advantage of our recreational facilities as well. So if we start shutting down basketball courts because they need $500 worth of asphalting, at the end of the day, it might be more beneficial for recreation and parks budget, but overall, I think we probably wind up losing money. So I don't know whether there's a better way to approach this issue as well. Deciding to yank down our basketball courts so it just winds up being an empty space so that no one plays on them seems to me like the wrong place to be putting our resources.
Yeah, I agree. And if I may, if faced with the prospect of either closing a tennis court or spending $1,000 to fix that tennis court, if that's the choice, I suspect that the choice will be made to fix the tennis court. And I suspect the council office in the area and the community and the park will find a way to make that happen. But that hasn't been the choice. The choice has been to keep the tennis court open, not fix it, and when an injury happens, have the general fund pay for it. And again, I don't mean to personalize this to this particular case in the department, but that's more broadly been the business model that the city has had. And I think we, frankly, council members, need to be faced with that choice, because I don't think we're adequately faced with it. If in your district you're faced with the prospect of such and such, facility, a swimming pool being closed because we can't afford the $2,000 to fix the electrical system on the light to avoid somebody being electrocuted, or we can't afford the $5,000 to fix the coping on the side of the pool to avoid somebody tripping and falling in, if we're faced with that choice, then we have a realistic view of our budgeting decisions and our priorities. We don't have a realistic view of what those priorities are if we just go along. If somebody gets hurt, it's just the cost of doing business that gets paid out of the general fund. That day has to stop.
Committee members, this is an item that is a deferred maintenance item that is across the city. And by opening this door, you're going to have general services, which is also responsible for all the other city facilities that have to look at those situations, as well as for Public Works to look at the sidewalks and so forth. This, respectfully, you're opening up a door that could open up the city to more liability, more lawsuits, but also, too, Recreation and Parks, we're ready to be involved in any discussions that you may want to have, but also, too, as we've stated, we've worked very closely with the city attorney, because we do not want to have the city pay out claims, but again, it is not as simple as it may appear.
Yeah, no, it's not simple, but we're also not opening the city to any other liability or lawsuits, because trust me, that liability and those lawsuits are coming no matter what. The only question is how it gets paid and how we realize that there's a cost to our actions or our inactions. So, Mr. Cardenas.
2 points. I understand Regina's point, of which she's not telling us not to have the discussion, but she's just reminding us that it's one thing to know that we've got miscellaneous issues going on all over the place, but it's another thing to bring somebody to the table and for them to start pointing out every single one until we finally can't handle it anymore and we tell them to stop. Because I think that's what's going to happen if we open up that discussion. But we should have some kind of discussion. But more importantly, I don't plan on being around here very long. But one of the things that has bothered me in the last 10 years is that when we bring up discussion or what have you, that the staff is way too gingerly and way too nice to us about not respectfully letting us know some things that we may or may not want to hear. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank Regina Adams for, as respectfully as possible, making her point on behalf of her department, because I have not seen that. I've only seen that maybe 3 or 4 times in 10 years with this city. So I hope throughout this year, especially, Chairman, as we start opening up more discussions, more realistic, honest discussions like this, that we do encourage our staff, especially our at-will employees, that speak up, tell us what we don't want to hear, tell us the truth. Just tell us the truth. And far too often people are so afraid that they're going to be retaliated or they're never going to be promoted if they speak up, or that they'll even be fired if they actually speak up or what have you, because some elected officials are that petty. I hope you spoke up, Regina, because you felt it was the right thing to do. And on top of that, I hope you spoke up because you feel that at least this group of individuals are not retaliatory in that fashion, and that we just want to hear what you have to say if you feel that that's the truth and we need to hear it. So I just want to take the opportunity to say that, Mr. Chairman. In 10 years, I've only seen that kind of response, honest response, maybe 4 times.
Councilmember, thank you very much for those comments, but also, too, I have served the City of Los Angeles residents for over 32 years, and I will continue to do that until I retire.
I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Cardenas, and I think this discussion is an offshoot of exactly what I'm talking about, which is we need to make our budget decisions, all of our budget decisions, based on reality, and be fully aware of all of the consequences of what we do as well. And what you've described is a perfect listing of the consequences of some of the budget decisions that this committee and the council has made as well, that we don't hear back enough. So I agree with you. We all need to be eyes wide open about the reality of what we're doing, which is not, it's not a pretty reality. And when somebody gets hurt and permanently disfigured because of something that the city fails to do and we have to pay that liability, that's not a pretty reality. When we have to deprive our constituents of the ability to use a swimming pool or a tennis court, that's a pretty horrible reality that cuts to the core of what we meet, what we're in this for. And I just don't think we can function as a budget committee, let alone as a city, unless we make our decisions based on that kind of honest discussion.
Deeper facts, not just
yeah. So anyway, I think that that pretty much exhausts this discussion for the time being. So,
I'll just add one
thank
other
you very
note,
much.
that there is a working group on the liability issue, and I believe we have a report back to sort of look at sort of liability and allocation methodology, things of that sort.
So when is that expected to be back, just so I can anticipate it?
I'll have to get back to you next
Okay.
time we're expecting it done.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to DOT.
That was exciting, folks.
That was interesting. Mine is Jack Nicholson, where he said, "You can't handle it."
I just have a couple of quick questions, just for clarification. On page 41 of the general report, it says appropriate and transfer $120,957 from the Coastal Transportation Corridor Trust Fund to the department's salaries general account to cover anticipated salary shortfalls for eligible workload activities for the duration of fiscal year. For what? Just for what?
The activities within that, the Coastal Trust Fund,
Yeah.
there was probably overtime or additional staff members that were working on the coastal corridor project.
You could probably, let me go through the question and just report back to me on it, okay? That was the first one on 41, the last paragraph there. It says, 2,000 from the overtime account to the salaries general account within the street furniture fund, 35,000 from overtime account to the salaries general account within the coastal corridor fund, 500,000 for salaries. For what? I just want answers on that. Then right below it, there is one other note that goes to the next page, 5,500 from the salaries overtime account to the salaries general account within the neighborhood traffic management fund, and 3,000 from the salaries overtime account to the salaries general account within the West Los Angeles Trust Fund. For what? And the last one is, same page, transfer down 155,000 contractual service and salaries in general to cover anticipated salary shortfalls for work related to the Warner Center Trust Fund and the West Los Angeles Mitigation Trust Fund. Just want to give explanation.
Sure.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So you're fine with just
I'm
getting an
fine
answer
with it.
back to
I
that?
just want to get an answer back.
All right. Thank you. Anything else for DOT? Okay. All right. Next
Okay, I
matter.
think the next question had to do with the voluntary furlough program.
That was Mr.
Yes.
Peretz.
I've been looking at this for several years since I got here, and what I can't figure out is whether general managers want us to do this or not, whether they're encouraging employees to participate, whether they're discouraging employees to participate, whether we're trying to market it to employees. Because it always seemed to me to be a good potential venue for savings for the city. But I've been told various things by various people, that if we actually tried to save a few $1 million by marketing this, some general managers would view this as doing harm to their department. So where are we actually on this program? Do we have a proactive opinion of any kind, or are we just sort of leaving this out there, catch as catch can?
Well, I think the program basically it is available for employees and departments to utilize to generate some savings. I think it would, as you're suggesting, it may be the policy and how it's implemented be different across different departments. I know for us, certainly it certainly is voluntary, and we don't put any restrictions on folks. I think since the program is being offered for next year, what we can probably do is sort of work with all the general managers to let them know that, this is available, we do encourage it, and you shouldn't be restricting your employees unless there's some sort of a very compelling, valid reason in order to take the furlough time.
The question is, do we want to be more proactive? Would we look at trying to enhance participation by trying to allow employees to group days, so they might be able to take 3 days at a time or 5 days at a time and actually make it a more desirable thing? Or will general managers try to stand in the way of that approach. Do we actually want to market it and encourage employees to do this? Or are we just saying, okay, each department could do a little bit and we'd save a tiny bit of money, but it wouldn't disrupt anything, which I think is where we are now. So that's the question. Do we have any policy? Are we trying to encourage any approach, or are we just leaving it out there as a tool that individual employees may utilize, but something we're not encouraging particularly?
Right now, it is a tool and for employees to utilize. I think the challenge is for an individual employee, if you start grouping your time into 3 or 4 days, then those 3 or 4 days become a bigger hit to that particular paycheck. Since we have biweekly paychecks, so it's because of that hit. Then employees that do take furlough time, it is usually hours instead of days.
But some people may want to take the opportunity to sort of turn it into a vacation and take a week's vacation and just not be paid for a week. And if we had general managers being willing to work that out with folks, I would imagine there would be more utilization of this.
Possibly. What it goes back to is basically if you take days, group of days, then it's a bigger hit to employees' paycheck, and that could be problematic for the majority of folks that the city has. So trying to sort of then take that and do something differently, we could run into some employee relation type issues. So
yeah, I'm looking more at it from the opposite viewpoint, that there will be employees that would love to do it. We'd never encourage them to do it, to their detriment, but there are employees I'm sure that would love to have the opportunity if their managers would allow them to. And I would think it would be something we could market if we actually wanted to do it. So I don't know if there's some way to look at doing this more proactively, because I really get the sense that we're not doing any of that.
See if we can come up with some additional ideas and suggestions in order to basically garner some renewed interest in the program.
If I could ask you, Mr. Kretz, this question. You're talking voluntary furloughs versus mandatory?
Yes.
Yes. Well, who would want to take a voluntary furlough day?
Well, anyone that...
Paycheck-wise.
Anyone that got used to it and kind of liked occasionally having an extra day off and would say, I'd be happy to work 5% less and be paid 5% less.
Well, all right. I just don't know anybody that would do that in this day and age. But I do know I'm just talking out of class here. But when DZ and his folks got together, they're proposing to the unions that people take 10 furlough days and you have to fire anybody from their system. In that context, I can understand it. But you find me somebody who's willing to do a volunteer furlough day.
Well, we had, as of this year, we have $1.5 million in savings overall from that. So there are people that will do it, and there are probably many employees that aren't even aware of the opportunity because we don't really market it.
Corrected. I didn't know $1.5 million came in voluntarily.
It's roughly about $50,000 per pay period is what we generate in savings. And you do raise a good point. There's been furlough days and time off that folks are already taken, and so this would be on top of that. So.
Okay. Anything further, Mr. Kretz?
No.
Okay, and then I believe the last question area of concern was the state budget impact and whether there's recent developments. Certainly, we provide some information as far as the May revise. At this point, there haven't been any other new developments that would, any new hits, I should say, on us that we anticipate for next year.
No, Maria Gutierrez with the CAO. We are hearing that the legislature may take some action on the budget bills this week. As you may know, they do have a deadline of this Friday, the 15th. It's a statutory deadline. The question is whether the budget that they will act on will be the type of budget that will be sustained on a long-term basis or the type of budget that will have to be reopened within the next couple of months. So as Ray mentioned, at this time, we are not aware of any new hits. But we will be looking at, as soon as they are available, budget bills and trailer bills as soon as they are posted. But we expect things to move very quickly this weekend. As you may know, sometimes it's not a very clear process. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes deals that will be taking place.
But at least as of now, we're not aware of anything else that would cost the city money that's been considered.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Cardenas, former budget chair of the California State Assembly.
Yeah, do we predict that they'll have an on-time budget this year?
Well, because there is I guess there's a new law or some kind of
The people pass
penalty for
statewide-
members if they don't pass by the 15th, whereby their salary is being withheld. There may be an incentive for them to pass something on the 15th.
Well, I think the more important law is that it does not require a two-thirds vote
That's
of
true.
the legislature anymore. It's a 50% threshold now. And unfortunately, when they were trying to get those two-thirds votes, a handful of the legislators that they would have liked to get across the two-thirds threshold could care less whether they got paid or not because they happen to be well off. So I think that the more important reason why I predict we'll have an on-time budget is because they are no longer required to find those last votes on the other side of the aisle to pass the budget. It's now 50% of each house, whereas before it was two-thirds. And getting those last few votes were extremely expensive, timely, and that's one of the main reasons why the budget process would go sometimes into August, because it required a two-thirds threshold. And we're one of the few states that did require that up until recently. Thank you.
One of only 3, in fact. And the downside with that is that, yes, we'll get an on-time budget, we'll probably get an on-time budget, but the problem is that you still need two-thirds to have any revenue enhancement. And so that on-time budget is going to be even more draconian in terms of cuts to services, which are going to affect the city and its residents as well. So I'm not sure if it's better or not to be on time, if that's going to be the result.
So to our most unfortunate, the poorer constituents in California, I would think that they're going to hope that it's the kind of budget that they reopen right away.
3 former assembly members.
So I would like to just provide the committee just a brief update. As you may recall, that we approved, as part of the budget, $48 million in basically former tax increment CRA monies to be part of our revenue base, or our basic part of the revenue for next year. Of that, $30 million was sort of one time. The city did receive a check of roughly about $27 million on June 1st. We are working with the Comptroller's Office and also the county auditor to sort of determine the correct amounts, what the payments are actually for. It looks like there's roughly about $23 million that would be as part of the $30 million that we anticipated. So we're looking into that. Hopefully there will be more money that will be coming back to the city in January. But right now we did get a check for $23 million, plus another $3 million or so for AB 1290. So.
Okay. All right. Ms.
And just
Kalfine.
one additional thing on the FSR is that our office has recommended, Karen Kalfine with the CLA's office, our office had recommended some adjustments for the council budget. We've provided those to the clerk, and these are within council funds and would reflect current expenditure levels.
Okay. Thank you. So, anything further, Mr.
No.
Sean? So, with the amendments that have been suggested and the technical amendments that have been provided by the clerk, which I think you have.
Yes, so we have the city clerk, the mayor, we have these corrections, and we also have neighbor empowerment.
Okay.
And we'll work with the clerk.
So with those amendments, unless there's any objection, colleagues, that will be the action, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the FSR as amended.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
So item 10 is the fourth construction project report and addendum.
Thank you, Ray. Good afternoon. My name is Alma Gibson with the CAO's office. And as Ray indicated, this is technically our year-end report. We're also including an addendum report to the construction projects report. And as you may already know, these reports basically provide financial transactions, recommendations, and funding adjustments for the various construction projects that are currently going on within the city. And these financial adjustments are necessary in order to keep these projects on track. We're also including financial adjustments primarily for reimbursements to various city departments from various financing such as the general obligation bonds, the NICLA financings, and the capital improvement expenditure program fund. Briefly, the report is basically recommending $19.4 million in transfers and appropriations. This includes the transactions within both reports. Of this amount, approximately $594,000 is for staff cost reimbursements for salary adjustments that were needed for various departments that currently do perform work on various construction projects and programs. We also are recommending approximately $8.7 million in appropriations to General Services Department, who perform the bulk of these construction work for the various projects that include building hazard mitigation, tenant improvements, public work improvements, as well as recreation and park improvements. Finally, the reports include approximately $9.9 million in costs that consists of administrative and technical transfers between other city funds. Lastly, I want to point out that this committee has in the past recommended for us to report the estimated impact due to operations and maintenance costs as a result of these transactions. These transactions currently will be, they will have an impact of approximately $408,000 a year, and these are due primarily to the expansion of the recreation and park facilities that will be taking place due to some of these transactions. I do have representatives hopefully still around to answer more specific questions regarding some of these transactions if you like.
Okay. Any questions on this matter, colleagues?
No.
I just wanted to check with the CAO. Is that $408,000 budgeted for the next fiscal year, the general fund impact?
So ongoing.
That's ongoing.
Exactly, and it's already included within RAP's budgets. So
for the next fiscal year.
These are for transactions for work that occurred this fiscal year. So this is for this fiscal year.
Okay, so is that $408,000? Did we already assume that $408,000 for fiscal year 12-13?
We allow with the CO's office. In the adopted budget for 2012-13, the COA and council made an adjustment of, I believe, $600-something thousand that was taken off of the proposed budget based on the timeline of the facilities coming online. So every year when we start the new budget process, Rec and Park gives us a master list of everything and when they think it comes online. We come up with a number during budget prep. You see that in your proposed budget, and as we get further in the budget discussion, that number is usually revised.
It has to be adjusted depending on the actual construction.
On the actual dates, because things move throughout the whole process.
Very good. Thank you. All right, without any, what is our recommendation on this? To approve the CAO's recommendations.
Thank you.
Any amendment, yes.
So moved.
Okay, that takes us to items 11, actually 11 and 12. Both of these were budget instructions. Item 11 was to instruct the CAO to report to the mayor and council with proposals for instituting a comprehensive citywide long-term capital plan. So item 11. So this is one of the budget instructions. We will be working on a long-term strategy, along with certainly the affected departments, the mayor, council, and others, in order to basically institute a long-term capital plan. So it's one of the report backs that we do have.
Okay.
Any questions?
Nope. Nope.
Okay, item 12, another report back, and this is for the CAO and the CLA to report to Budget and Finance with recommendations for revising the definition for the capital funding program. Right now, we have a 1% funding program of general fund dollars for capital infrastructure. There was a request to sort of look at the definition and how we define and categorize those items. And so that's one of the report backs that we will bring back to committee.
Okay, so without objection, we'll adopt the motion.
Okay.
Brings us to 13.
All right, so that takes us to the last item, and this will be in council tomorrow. It's the CEO report relative requesting authority to hire 2 law firms, Best and Krieger, and Byron Nixon, to represent the city in matters related to the former CRA of Los Angeles, now known as CRA DLA. And we have questions, yes.
Mr. Cardenas.
I do. It happens to be that Best and Krieger was the hired city attorney for the city of Bell throughout the entire time that the officials over at the city of Bell were involved in what eventually ended up being a internationally talked about scandal in the city of Bell. Again, it was Best and Krieger who was the city attorney for that city throughout that process, and they were dismissed as the city attorney shortly after the situation came to the public attention. Are we aware of what Best and Krieger did internally to make sure that they don't allow themselves to do dumb things like that again?
Dolores Rivera of the CEO's office, and actually I do have the firm explanation on that.
Sure, I'd love to hear.
And the firm is also amenable to be available tomorrow to further explain. According to the firm, the explanation provided is the firm was not directly retained by the city of Bell, but rather it was through an attorney by the name of Ed Lee, who was then afterwards hired by Best and Krieger, and so he brought Bell with him as a client. That's the explanation that was given to us. And so when the Bell controversy broke through, Mr. Lee left the firm, and the firm also withdrew as legal representative to the city of Bell, so they don't represent the city of Bell. But again, the firm is available to come tomorrow to further explain this.
Sure. I'd love to hear how that explains anything.
Okay.
Basically, what you just said is that they were not hired by the city of Bell.
Not directly retained, but retained indirectly through another attorney that was subsequently hired by the firm.
Exactly. I mean, again, that's an interesting answer, non-answer, not your answer, but their answer, explanation, because whether the city of Bell hired Attorney X and then Attorney X joined Best and Krieger and brought that client with that person from that moment forward, I would assume, I'm not a lawyer, but Best and Krieger was responsible for actions of people who work for their firm. So why they allowed that to happen just because the person had great credentials when they brought him on, so they didn't think they needed to oversee what the heck he was doing or what have you. Again, the question that I have to Best and Krieger is going to be, what were you thinking? I mean, that was when you brought that lawyer on, whatever he or she's name is, it was Best and Krieger who was responsible. For example, when I was a real estate broker, whenever I had an agent, the agent was actually separately licensed, but as soon as they came under my purview, under my brokerage, every single one of their actions stopped. The buck stopped with the broker, just like Best and Krieger, whether the client was, the city of Bell / client was brought on by an attorney that they folded into their business. From that moment forward, they have culpability, responsibility, something's going on where responsibility also is shared by them.
Right.
But this is the part that Best and Krieger is going to regret, is that when I brought this up as a member of the League of Cities board, Best and Krieger never reached out to me and offered to explain to me back then, a year ago, what the heck happened, why their good name was involved in that situation. None of them ever bothered to come and talk to me, and I made it plain and clear at one of the board meetings that I didn't think that the League of Cities should be associated with Best and Krieger until we got clear explanation as to why we're hanging out with these guys.
Well, during the interview process, they did bring it up. It didn't seem, when they brought it up, it wasn't as big of a deal. It didn't trigger a red flag, again, because of the explanation that the firm was indirectly retained through another attorney. I do know that the firm represents 35 other cities, so, Bell at the time is another...
I happen to have a problem with the good old boys. I happen to have a problem with firms that are big that seem to say, well, we got 35 other clients. Well, that's my point. I personally believe, Mr. Chairman, if it were a small firm, it would have buried them. A small firm, people would have just labeled, the big firms would have labeled that small firm and said, y'all ought to make an example of them. Nobody should ever hire them again, because look at what shenanigans they were involved in. And that's the way small firms are treated, whether it's law firms, construction firms, et cetera, especially women and minority firms. But that's the problem that I have with big firms. And case in point, I'll make even a louder point on this. That was the biggest problem that I think we had with Wall Street, that what happened was the people who were involved in shenanigans on Wall Street that caused the government as an answer, not the answer, but an eventual answer from the government in the United States was, they're too big to fail. So what did we do? We took public funds to bail out these big investment firms / banks. Why? Because they were the ones who had a shingle that said, we've been in business since 1738, we've been in business since 1880. We've been around so long that our credentials are unquestionable. Well, as a matter of fact, the city of Los Angeles is in lawsuits with certain of the biggest firms in the world, yet at the same time, we do not have one lawsuit with a medium or small firm.
Right.
Why? Because they don't tend to be involved in those shenanigans. It's when we trust somebody way too much because they're so big and they have 35 other clients is the reason why sometimes we're able to take a non-answer like that and say, well, I guess that they answered the question. With all due respect, whoever they answered that question to doesn't satisfy me. That's a non-answer. That's a non-answer. I have 4 children that I'm raising. I'm almost done, Mr. Chairman. They just happen to hit on something that's very near and dear to my heart. I happen to have 4 children that are blood of my family that I'm raising. If I adopt a child, 6 years old, 16 years old, or what have you, but once that child is part of my household, in my opinion, I'm equally responsible. I can't go around saying, well, I adopted him. Shame on me if I'm not willing to take equal responsibility for every child that I call my child, as I hope people call that person when they adopt someone as their child. This person that brought Bell with him to Best Best and Krieger, shame on Best Best and Krieger to call that an answer by saying, well, we took care of it. He came with that client. He's no longer with us. I have heard of no sanctions on behalf of, I'm not a lawyer, what is it, the bar or something like that, or some state agency or what have you. I have absolutely no evidence whatsoever that anybody's looking into Best Best and Krieger or wondering why they were remotely involved with one of their lawyers who brought that client with them. I love that answer. I can't wait to see them. Please invite them to come to the council.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I understand they will be in council. I don't know how big they are, what the demographics of the firm are, or anything, but I feel like as the lawyer, I've got to pipe up a little bit that a law firm is not an accounting firm. A law firm doesn't have the same kinds of duties that an accountant would say to disclose or identify wrongdoing, and a lot of times law firms have the role, well, all the time the law firm has the role of representing its client. I don't know that there's been, and maybe you know more about this than I, but I don't know that there's been an allegation that the law firm participated in any wrongdoing. If they have, then I think, that would definitely be of great interest to us and whether or not we retain them. But the fact that they had a client that was a bad actor alone shouldn't be something that disqualifies our consideration of them. Lots of law firms have firms that are clients that end up being bad actors. That's one of the reasons they go and get law firms, because they need help in a legal matter. So I think the fact that they're associated with a really unsavory client isn't alone enough.
You're calling the lawyer that worked for them the client, or Bell?
No, Bell.
Yeah.
The fact that they had a client that turned out to be outrageous and a perpetrator of great wrongdoing doesn't necessarily, it could, But it, by that fact itself, doesn't reflect on the, shouldn't reflect on the law firm unless they were complicit in some way or participating in some way, and that's something that is worth exploring to find out.
You make the point better than I do, Mr. Chairman. I don't know.
Worthy questions to ask.
I don't know if they were. I haven't heard of any agency or entity that said we looked into it and we exonerate them of any wrongdoing or what have you. All I've heard back when I brought it up as a member of the board of the California League of Cities, of which I'm pretty sure all those other 35 cities that they represent are members of the League of Cities, that this firm represents, I didn't hear one answer other than, oh, we fired the guy. We got rid of him. The lawyer. They got rid of that lawyer. But to this day, that answer still does, to me, that's not a very good answer. Of course, I'm
Well, they're going to
glad
be
they
here
got
tomorrow.
rid of
They're going to be in council, right?
They will be in
So
council
you'll,
tomorrow.
they'll have their day in court.
Sure.
There is one additional thing concerning the waiver. I just want to point out a little small correction. One of the, relating to land fill matter with the city of Carson, and in the attached letter, it also references Covina, and it should be West Covina. If I may request that correction.
All right, and as long as we're talking about the conflicts panel, if these recommendations are approved, what's the status of the conflicts panel, and how much remains in that fund?
Okay. Well, for this year's budget, we have, the Attorney Conflicts Panel was appropriated $2 million, and we've expended nearly $700,000. Next year, the budget is for 1.7. The Attorney Conflicts Panel is the type of, the budget is, the funds don't revert back, but they roll over to the next year. So whatever surplus will roll over.
Good, so you have a healthy surplus now?
Yes, I'll be able to, hopefully.
Budget question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Do we get any of that funds covered by the CRA? Because in this case, it's the conflict of CRA, right? The city attorney is conflicted out from
Right,
those deliberations.
but in this situation, we're seeking, these recommendations are to represent the city.
Yes.
So in terms of reimbursement from CRA, that has not been entertained, but
I don't.
It's over CRA
know.
matters.
Yeah, we can look into that, but I don't believe we will probably get reimbursed for these.
Maybe the state, they caused this whole argument. Never know.
we can certainly.
We'd love to put it on our ups, but I doubt if it'll quite
That would be
survive.
great.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
All right, so, Mr. Cardin, you want to be recorded as a no on that. Mr. Rosendahl? Okay, so that recommendation is approved with
2-1.
2 ayes and 1 no.
Okay, and that was the last item. That'd be it.
That is the last item, and unless Dr. Weissman has come back, which I don't see him, we are adjourned.
Adjourned, yes.